Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. Come on now, I said not to let things get crazy while I was away. Look what happened. Never a dull moment. Obviously, we've got a lot to go over. Let's go for a ride. Shout out to our Tier 3 patrons, Peter Park and Shay Meehan, as well as all our other patrons. Your ongoing support is incredible. Thank you. If anyone out there wants to join in keeping this podcast going, head on over to patreon.com/YangDaily. So as you've surely heard by now, especially if you were checking in on my Twitter feed, right after our last episode and after the bill passed Congress, Trump got off the bench and waded into the relief negotiations. Up to that point, he had handed off the task to Mnuchin, as he had a lot of co-conspirators to pardon, which we'll get to later, and came out in a video saying he was disappointed in the relief bill and implied that he would veto it. It included a lot of misinformation, of course, conflating the relief bill with the omnibus spending bill, and maligning funding for overseas humanitarian aid, also falsely laying all of that at the feet of the Democrats. But that's not the important part to us. The important part is that he called on Congress to increase the $600 checks to $2,000. This caught pretty much everyone by surprise, no one more so than the members of his own party who, up until the video came out, had been told by Trump's staff that he supported the bipartisan relief bill as it was written. Trump has always been mercurial, with many of his former co-workers saying he only remembers the last thing he was told, but a lot of people who used to manage Trump's wild swings were out of the picture, so he apparently made the video without hardly anyone knowing. The upside is that Trump is now at odds with the Republican legislature over adding more cash aid, and Pelosi immediately agreed with Trump and announced the Democrats' intent to pass an amendment to increase the check amount in the bill, saying she would have done so earlier if she'd known Trump would support it. Elizabeth Warren has also confirmed that the general Democratic establishment is united on the push for bigger checks. The House held a vote for unanimous consent on the amendment today, which is an expedited process where it would pass if no one objects, but some House Republicans did object. The House will hold a roll call vote on Monday for the amendment where everyone's vote is identified in the record. The people will know who votes against cash relief. If another extension is not passed, or the House, Senate, and Trump do not all come to an agreement on the entire affair, the government will enter shutdown on Tuesday. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. First, there's a slight chance that the Senate may actually pass this. Trump holds enormous sway over the party, as we've seen all too clearly. The Republican Party and legislators have largely identified themselves as the party of Trump and ridden that sycophancy to re-election. They do not want to be seen as opposing Trump due to the backlash they might face next election cycle. That goes double for Loeffler and Perdue in Georgia, whose elections are days away. It would be terrible optics for the GOP to vote down unadulterated money for the American people. There can be no excuses of pork or special interests this time. The amendment is just about money directly to Americans. That said, House Republicans already demonstrated that they are willing to do the wrong thing regardless, and are attempting to distract via demanding that routine foreign aid be removed from the omnibus. Figures that they'd go along with Trump's atrocities up to now when he's actually trying to do something good for the people. Clearly, that's the hill to die on. The other outcome is, of course, they don't pass it. While that would clearly be a worse outcome, Trump's actions would still be beneficial. First, Trump taking a hard stance for unconditional cash to citizens means that a lot of Trump voters are suddenly going to be all about it, which means UBI just became a lot more popular and more likely to pass. Second, those voters will see the GOP as the enemy now. Some already do. It could massively undermine the GOP campaigns in Georgia, which have been pandering to Trump voters. Those relations are already frayed as Trump has been constantly lashing out at the GOP for not supporting his coup attempts to his liking. It's going to be hard for them to court Trump voters while openly opposing Trump. It could easily lead to a Democratic Senate, which, as we've discussed, is absolutely vital to any real hope of solving the country's problems before they drown us out for good. I'm happy to report that Ossoff and Warnock have already picked up on this and are messaging appropriately, challenging the Senate to stop obstructing Trump and pass real relief. Let's be clear, the UBI movement has always dreamed of a day when both parties support UBI and argue instead over how to implement it. Well, in a sense, we suddenly find ourselves there. Regardless of how this plays out, I think this is a massive win for UBI. That said, we'd clearly prefer that it end with bigger checks, both to help the movement and to help the millions of Americans who need that money. So write and call Republican senators and tell them the only way out of this that leaves their career intact also happens to be the right thing to do. Contact Trump as well and tell him that the people are with him on this and to bend the treacherous Senate to his will. Play to the ego and how it can help him get money. As always, Income Movement has already set up a template letter for you. Take a moment to follow the link in the podcast description. And Trump already proved his belligerence by vetoing the defense bill the other day, despite it having a veto-proof majority in Congress. That will delay but not stop the bill. He may do the same with the COVID bill. In other Trump news, he's also begun his pardon spree, issuing 26 pardons in the last few days. Among those pardoned were 2 people who pled guilty in Mueller's Russia investigation, including Trump's foreign policy advisor during his campaign, 3 former Republican Congress members convicted of corruption, lying to the FBI, money laundering, and profiteering, and 4 Blackwater guards convicted for involvement in the murder of 17 Iraqi civilians in 2007, with the youngest victim being 9 years old. Many of the pardons bypassed the DOJ's review process because less than half met the department's criteria for pardons. Trump had pardoned or commuted the sentences of 45 people prior to these. 88% were people with personal ties to Trump or people who helped further his political goals, which distinguishes Trump's pardon record as the most corrupt in history. And he's only getting started. Though this should infuriate everyone, it should not surprise anyone. In addition to Trump's record in general, there's the story of Republican Governor Bevin. Bevin was a Trump disciple and used his own position to pardon an incredible array of hardcore murderers and rapists. Seriously heinous crimes that you can read about in the article below, but I won't speak of here. It generated outrage even in the GOP, but Trump supported his re-election right up to the end. There's your law and order president, America. Really cleaning out that swamp. It truly is hard to imagine at this point what Trump could possibly do to lose votes that he hasn't already. Seriously, what line is left to cross? This is why it reeks of cult behavior. In related news, Dominion Voting Systems, the makers of voting machines that Trumpists have been falsely accusing them of having rigged, are now threatening to sue conservative media outlets that have been repeating those accusations for libel. Frankly, I'm amazed they haven't already. Moving on from Trump, the internet is abuzz with the news that Andrew has filed paperwork for the city's Board of Elections to explore a run for New York City mayor and opened a campaign bank account. Of course, the nuance is lost that this is just a continuation of the consideration he's been deliberating for months, and not a commitment to any course of action. The few cabinet positions yet to be announced by Biden include both Commerce and Labor Secretary. Humanity Forward announced that they're putting together a volunteer and grassroots supporter collage that you can put your face on. Just tweet them a photo by the end of the month and tag @HumanityForward in the thread below. Alright, listen up now because we've got an incredible update from Math Movement. They reported that they have knocked on 10,000 doors and activated 100 new volunteers to get the Senate working for the people in Georgia. This is exactly the actions it takes to make our dreams a reality, gang. America will be crippled for years without the Senate, which may truly be longer than the country can bear. Math Movement is looking to grow their ranks even more and can offer housing and transportation support to anyone who can spend a few days in Georgia, running up until the election on January 6th. They need all the bodies they can get to change the world. Donations help too. Please join them if you can. And finally, Yang's family shared a heartwarming picture on Twitter that is just the thing to lead you into a Merry Christmas. Andrew took a picture of Evelyn lending her long locks to son Damien so he can see what he'd look like with long hair. It's absolutely adorable. He pulls it off easily. Trust me, click the link. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Blast Congress and Trump like crazy to support $2,000 checks. Send your letter through Income Movement at the link below. Support the math movement however you can. Don't forget to put in your half hour a day of phone banking or text banking to support the efforts in Georgia. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, or United Way. And don't forget to Yang Daily.